Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rebecca Friedman. I'm the director of the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University here in Miami. Welcome back to season 2 of the WPHL's Coffee and Conversations, Museums and Histories of Anti-Blackness. We first began this webinar at the start of the coronavirus pandemic and quarantine, now a lifetime ago, in order to understand how cultural institutions were handling the changes before us at the time. The pandemic, however, is not at all isolated. Rather, as we continue to see the need to end anti-Black violence, we acknowledge the overlapping pandemics of today, deeply rooted in the past. Today, we'll emphasize the significance of centering Black lives and experiences in museums and cultural institutions, and the challenges of working against powers at institutions and the field of public history and society more generally, that have historically sought to erase, marginalize, or whitewash Black histories and experiences. The responsibility and power of cultural institutions has never been more poignant. And today we are lucky enough to have an excellent guest, once Miami resident and FIU Panther, Klaudio Rodriguez, the interim director of the Bronx Museum of the Arts. Klaudio came to the Bronx Museum of the Arts from the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum here in Miami at FIU, where he was chief curator. He also has served on the diversity and mentoring committees of the Association of Art and Museum Curators. So welcome, Klaudio. I'm so glad to have you here with us today to get a chance to talk to you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So very briefly, our format is simple. The two of us will talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the audience for the remaining 10 minutes. So at any time, you can submit a question using the Q&A chat button at the bottom of the screen, all very familiar to us by now. So welcome. Maybe, Klaudio, we can just get started by you briefly describing the work that you do at the Bronx Museum of the Arts.
Sure, absolutely. So me specifically, I direct the day-to-day operations. I work closely with my board and my staff in developing and implementing the direction, the programs, and initiatives to fulfill the mission of the organization. I'm responsible for the programmatic vision and the fundraising efforts of the museum, amongst many other things. To put it simply, though, the work that we do with the museum as a whole is we're firmly planted in the community in which we inhabit, which is the South Bronx, as you know. We're a contemporary art museum. We strive to serve the diverse audiences in the community. The Bronx is one of the most ethically and economically varied constituents in the United States. Latinos and African Americans comprise something like 80% of the population, and there's also a large expanding population of Caribbean and West Africans. And we try to take bold initiatives to focus on these diverse groups and the rich heritage through the exhibitions, the public programs, the educational programs, and our collections, the work we collect, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I've never been. I would actually like to go one day.
Anytime.
And speaking
we
of,
are open as of September 9th. We are open after 6 months.
That's what I was going to ask you next, is if you would talk with us a little bit, because I think you might be the second person with whom we've spoken who's actually going to work and leaving his home to actually go to the museum or cultural institution. So what was that like? If you could just tell us a little bit what it was like to kind of get back to work in that way.
Yeah, I've been going into work now for a couple of months, actually. It was important for me to get back into the routine, back into the building. It was important for me to have distant but one-on-one conversations with my staff. We have this big rental space that we have set up, our conference room. We sit, but it's important to start to sort of get back into the swing of things. As far as the New York City, it's been hit very hard, as you know, and things were shut down for a very long time. It was a challenge, or a little fear at the beginning to get into the subway with other people. But again, like I said, it was important for me to get sort of back into the groove of what we were doing. And then so we reopened September 9th. And I think one of the things that we found is that what we've done is our museum, and I can speak to this a little later, we've been free admission for a very long time, but now we need we're talking about time ticketed entries, right, to control the crowds that are coming in. And what we found is that we're booking all the slots, but people are not showing up yet. We have maybe a 30% rate of attendance. So we're looking at different strategies and to engage the community further and bring it back into the museum. But I think there's still this fear, you know, from our audiences to get back in spaces. But we're a fairly large building, so I think you'll be safe.
So if we weren't in Miami, we would all come right now. So let's talk a little bit about the subject of anti-Blackness and cultural institutions. Would you say that the museum field in general and the Bronx Museum of the Arts in particular have been proactive or reactive relative to concerns about racism and social justice? In other words, is this something you would suggest that the field is only now taking seriously, or rather something that's much more longstanding?
That's a tricky one. I mean, certainly, you know, I think, you know, the field's been considering these issues of racism and diversity and social justice for a really long time. I mean, these have been the points of discussion in conferences that I've attended over the years, in my time as a curator and as a director. It's been discussed in literature and lectures and panels and so on. But really, what's happened now is that we're at an inflection point, right? I mean, our hand has been forced in some way. And it's not longer just discussing or conceptualizing, but it's about action. I think that we, as an institution, have been proactive rather than reactive. Frankly, it's one of the reasons why I came to the Bronx Museum. I've always envisioned the museum as a welcoming, activated ensemble of thoughtful experimental programming that we do, a decolonized forum for our community so we can engage. So I think in reality, our mission really is rooted in this idea, in this idea of proactivity, of being a leader and supporting and advancing art, social justice, equal opportunity. Our mission has been focused on providing these underserved community members of the Bronx access to the type of quality programming that we do. Like I said before, our free admission policy, our education programs, our public programs, the distinct collection that we have, which highlights, you know, works by underrepresented artists of African, Asian, Latin American backgrounds. And also, I think we're one of the few, if not the only one, a museum that has a position, an endowed position, the Holly Block Social Justice Curator, who specifically works in organizing these type of exhibitions and programs that tackle all these pressing issues. So we've been doing this type of work for a while. So we try to practice what we preach, so to speak. But, and not only just through our exhibitions and our programs, which I just mentioned, but through our commitment through diverse hiring practices, which is clearly important, but not just for the sake of hiring, but we're talking about hiring Black and brown people in positions of leadership. You know, zero tolerance policy on racism from staff and visitors. And, you know, as a general rule, we've always focused on inclusivity and accessibility as an ethos for the organization. As an aside, I mean, part of it is, you know, the Bronx is the third most densely populated county in the whole entire United States. So we clearly serve a very, very large community. But we also serve the poorest congressional district in the whole entire nation. And 40% of the students in our district live below the federal poverty line. So, and we were one of the hardest hit regions by the pandemic. So that being said, there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of room for growth, but I think museums as a whole, maybe it's maybe a little unpopular, but they've been reactive and late to the game. I think that there's been a game of catch up for a long, long time. You know, they've done a poor job of being diverse and inclusive, but the last 6 months, the public has also caught on to what's happening. And, you know, now you have this cancel culture that's been going on. You see museum leadership, directors, boards are in the middle of these, and this, the crosshairs now. You know, you see several institutions that have been, you know, hit with allegations of sexism, racism, classicism, abuse, and so forth. And I think, you know, while they've been listening, that time is past now. You know, we need to figure out now what to do and how to do it. But it really begins with, I think, with our personal work. It just, excuse me, is to only understand not just our field, but the entire system and the structure of the whole country, that has been built on this racism, and understanding what systemic racism is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the laws, the structures, the rules, the government, property ownership, power over people of color, it's all these different structures. And I think that we as museums need to first have that deep understanding of these structures, and to recognize that we have the power as museums, as museum leaders. And then we need to think in deep, thoughtful, strategic ways in how to utilize that platform for the public good. We just don't want to talk about it. We want to make meaningful, tangible change and just not lip service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds like you already are and have been doing all of that good work for a long time now, especially as you suggested, given the nature of the community where the museum is. I guess one question I have, I'm going a little off script here. One question I have, just hearing you talk, is whether or not there's been a sense among institutions within New York City to get together and have these conversations, because given the population that you serve and the work that you've been doing over the long term, I would think that you and your museum can be kind of a leader in that conversation. So has there been an effort citywide to have?
Yeah, I think that's one of the positives that has come out. It's been that there's been this dialogue within the institutions, within the leadership of the institutions. I mean, it started with the pandemic and these groups getting together to discuss, reopening strategies, financial pressures, and so on and so forth. But then when after George Floyd and all the other things started to happen, the conversation shifted. And I think that's been important because we haven't worked like that before as a collective, so now we're having these conversations, these dialogues as a group, and it's been enriching and very important, frankly, to have these conversations. And not just, yes, we're doing a lot of things right, but there's a lot of things we need to learn. So it's been very beneficial to me in sort of thinking in broader terms rather than just in our own sort of insular selves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you have a sense of optimism, even though there's clearly a lot of work ahead. Yeah. Do you think, I guess I'm pressing a little bit here on that, is whether or not the conversations that you're having and the ways in which museums and cultural institutions are transforming in New York and around the nation and the world in this moment. And also funding agencies, I'm sure you're more than aware, are now all of a sudden, or maybe not all of a sudden, but more interested in questions of diversity and equity in leadership and in content and so forth. So do you think, there's a cynical way to look at all of it, right? And then on the other hand, there is a kind of more optimistic way to think about whether or not these transformations that are happening right before our eyes are for the long term. Where would you stand on that question? It's a hard one.
Whether they're short-term or long-term?
Yeah, like how optimistic are you that this is?
I'm optimistic simply because we almost have no choice but to be, to change and to adapt. The pressure is there to do so. I think that, by and large, at least here in New York City, the organizations understand. There's a public outcry for change. There is a need, going back to something very simple, like you said, from funders now to enact this change. A lot of my funders are looking for issues. They're even less interested. They're more interested in what I call sort of the kitchen table issues, things that are, that really strike home. And ultimately that's where it really is going to affect change as well, right? Is that our funders are requiring that change from us as organizations as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm optimistic. I think that there is an absolute long life to this moment.
That gives me hope, and I hope that gives our listeners hope too. You've mentioned all kinds of ways in which kind of racism, anti-Blackness operates within museums and cultural institutions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, as far as kind of content, the ways in which, if museum exhibitions are changing. I understand that leadership is changing, and that partly will be a product of educational institutions changing. Like you said, it's a kind of systemic, multi-layered process. But in the meantime, could you talk a little bit about exhibitions, future exhibitions for you, for others that you know that really might be paying attention to this particular moment and the push, you know, for social justice and racial justice?
Absolutely. I think, you know, for us, one of the things that we did, we were able to, fortunately, because we had some gaps in our schedule and some of the things that we were working on, we were able to address a lot of these things very quickly, very nimbly. Right now, we opened an exhibition of Sanford Biggers called Code Switch, and it's a series of his quilt works that is tackling some of these issues, discussing some of these issues, and the idea of code switching, you know, to assimilate between languages, between peoples. And more importantly, the exhibition that follows is an exhibition, I'm going to sort of keep it brief, but we're working with an artist called Sean Leonardo, and it's called The Breath of Empty Space. I don't know if you're familiar with Sean Leonardo's work. This is an exhibition that was a bit controversial because it's addressing police brutality, and actually it started even before the latest, you know, before George Floyd. This exhibition was a traveling exhibition that went to Baltimore, and it was slated to go to another institution, and the exhibition was pulled from the other institution right before it was set to open. And there was a lot of public outcry. And again, I don't want to get too much into, you know, the missteps somewhere else. There was a concern about the content, about the community that it was being placed in. And we snapped it up right away. I thought it was very important for us to put it in. So that'll be a show that we're going to be opening in early January. And it's the exhibition itself, I'll quickly, you know, give you a preview of it, but it's sort of reframing the visual narrative of systemic violence against Black men in America through the series of drawings and videos that he produced. And it shows he's using images from the media and mediating them to show this idea of systemic oppression, police violence against Black and brown young men. So we immediately sort of jumped on this discourse and this dialogue. And so this is, again, and this is the type of work that we've been doing for a while. And we're actually celebrating my wonderful social justice curator, and the whole year has been planned around this idea of social justice and social initiatives, whether it's women's rights, you know, Black and brown people of color, the community. So this entire year, and actually, you know, it's been an interesting feat simply because of the pandemic and the financial pressures that we've had. But we thought it was really important to really focus on these issues right away. But because we are small and we are nimble, we are able to adapt also as well, and to address issues that are important to us very quickly.
That's really great. Congratulations on all that work. It sounds incredibly important and inspiring. Will it make you more or less popular within the New York City environment?
You know, I don't know. You know, there was it was funny. There was those conversations at the board level, even about the exhibition and the kind of messaging that we were sending out, and we went back and forth. But frankly, I thought it was too important to not do, and I think that, you know, that's part of what we do. I want to open up that conversation. So if somebody wants to complain or somebody wants to argue, bring it on, and we'll have the conversation. You know, that's fine.
That's great. And will it be available digitally for those of us not near?
Absolutely, and I'll talk about that later. But yes, that's another thing that we're doing, is we're going to try to continue a lot of our virtual programming into the future, simply because it's another way to allow for access as well.
That's great. Yeah, that was going to be my next question, which has to do with the kind of long-term impact of the Corona moment on the ways in which museums and cultural institutions operate. So it sounds like you're embracing that as well. Wonderful. All right, well, we're actually at our 20 minutes. So I'm gonna, unless there's any last thing you want to say formally, I'm gonna open it up for questions. Yeah. Please.
I think, you know, one of the questions you asked me, and I really wanted to address, was sort of these core issues that are affecting the museums, and specifically us, because I think it's important to really touch on it very quickly, because I think that there's two core issues, because I find myself talking a lot about exhibitions or programs, right? And I think that the two core issues is, one is the internal politics of the museum structure, right? And the second is the public-facing side of the museum. And right now, of course, they're both being criticized and scrutinized, but I think it's important that we understand that we need to create more positions for people of color, positions of people in power, of people of color, and in decision-making positions, both at the staff and the board level. You know, because this will translate ultimately to the type of exhibitions that we show, the type of conversations that are built around them, and ultimately the type of visitors that are showing up to the institutions. This is the power of representation. And second is the public-facing side, right? Which is the barriers that museums have set up traditionally just by their very structures. You know, the idea of the ivory tower, that things such as paywalls, entry fees, things that create sometimes for communities like ours that are almost insurmountable barriers to access, right? We became free admission in 2013. I think the Frost down there is also still free admission as far as I know. And it's removing these type of obstacles. You know, they still possess this air of exclusivity, elitism, that they perpetuate these structures of oppression. And I think the general thought is that, you know, it's important for me is that right now they're positioned in a way that's maybe not interesting or exciting, or that they speak directly to people of color. I think, you know, I think something like 6% of all museum visitors are people of color in the United States. So the question is, what is it to be a museum citizen when we're not being reflected in these museum spaces, right? Or we don't feel welcome. I think, and this is sort of the point that I wanted to make, and this is because this is a point that I've been discussing with my board, is I think we need to think about the museums, think of them as a community center, but not in the traditional way as some sort of community gathering spot, but as the center of the respective communities that they sit in, right? In that it connects and reflects the communities that they sit in and the communities that we need to engage. I think, you know, the places like us at the Bronx is that we're not just rooted in the community, but they're to serve not just as a cultural space, but we're sites of education, political organizing, discourse, and, you know, various other forms of stewardship. I wonder how different the communities would look if all these cultural institutions took this type of ethos, not just, you know, moments of crisis, but just in general moving forward. I think it's important to understand that there is these two parts of it, is the internal and the external. We're working, you know, side by side with these two things. And I think that's really a takeaway.
Yeah, that seems incredibly important, and also to kind of fight back against the elitism that is somehow innate to art institutions in this country and maybe around the world. So congratulations for doing that. It also leads into one of the questions that we have, which is from Susan Gladstone, the director of the Jewish Museum of Florida. Susan, Susan asks you whether or not you think museums and communities like yours should become centers for voting registration or places for safe voting in this season.
Actually, we've been discussing this very issue. There's been a discussion about making a museum a voting site. We have some issues because some other venues that are also looking at it. But one of the things that we have done is we are working I was working recently with my curator, and we're doing a program, a public program. Trying to think what it is. I don't remember what it is, but we're looking at a public program sometime in mid-October that is looking at, it's a dialogue between Sean Leonardo and Sanford Biggers. And we're talking about these very same things. And actually what we're doing is it's a call to action, a call to vote. It's actually the dialogue is about, the conversation is about voting and active and civil activism. So we are trying, if we're not able to be a venue for it, we're actually trying to spread the word. We also have, through all our social media channels, have been very active in pushing the census as well, and having people fill in the census to have their voices heard in the Bronx. And also we provide forms within the museum as well. So we're proactive in that way.
That's great. It really sounds like all the work you're doing, you're kind of a paragon of using the position and the institution for social justice. So it's fantastic. Let everybody do what you're doing. All right, we have a couple more questions. The next one is from Julio Capo, our deputy director. He says, thanks so much for this exchange, Klaudio, great insight. I wonder if we can talk a bit more about some of the differences between serving Miami and the Bronx, considering your vast experiences in both. And then here's a second question. So let's start with that one. So Miami and the Bronx.
Well, I mean, I think the differences are very different simply because of my role and the type of work that I do here. So I mean, when I was at the Frost, you know, my mandate was more to serve the university community first and foremost, right? So it was a different community, a different audience that I was serving. Here, of course, I'm tasked with engaging the Bronx community and the larger New York City at large, broader New York City at large. But in some ways, I think all the work is rooted in this idea of diversity and exposing, you know, you to different artists and works and different narratives and different dialogues. So I think the parallels are there. But yeah, I mean, the communities I serve are vastly different. Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. So I think we have time for his second question and then one last. He asked if you will talk a bit more about what it's meant for diversifying audiences and creating more space for all to come experience the art held there.
What is meant for diversifying audiences?
Yeah, like how you have diversified audiences or how you plan to diversify your audiences at the museum and to create space so that everybody comes and feels comfortable to see the art there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some things are very simple, right? I mean, I've made it a point to make sure that every bit of information is in bilingual, right? That everything is provided in a bilingual way. We're trying actually, this is a larger process, but when I get off this call, we're working on a website redesign, and part of it is to provide a bilingual website as well, which is going to be really a real challenge for us. But also goes back to what I said. I mean, I've put people in positions to have this dialogue with the larger community. Our curator is the Southeast Asian, looking at, you know, issues that are really help inform the community there. I think it's about the type of programs that we're doing, of course, the type of educational programs that we're working on. And we sort of are always engaging different audiences. We're always trying to sort of shift it around, always trying to activate different discourses within what we're doing. And that's what we're hoping to bring diverse audiences into the building. So not just to keep sort of repeating ourselves. And I mean, we take, you know, specifically with our programs, our public programs. I mean, we ran a program a little while ago, something called Bronx Speaks Dreamers. So we went out into the community, talking to activists and community builders, talking about the undocumented immigrants in the community. And we worked in cultural anchors, cultural businesses. We had artistic platforms, just poetry, spoken word, visual art, and so on. But we took it out into the communities, to the diverse communities, whether it was the African American communities, whether it was Latino communities, all these different communities within the Bronx. And that's also a way that we hope to pull back audiences as well to the work that we're doing. I can't hear you, Rebecca. You got mute.
How about now? Am I muted?
There, I hear you now, yes.
Well, your last comment leads into our final question, which is from someone I believe you know, Stephanie Chansey. She asks if you can speak to a little bit about the community educational programming that you do and how that informs young people in particular in the Bronx about career possibilities in the arts and in museums.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, you know, I think that our educational programs are probably the highlight, the strength of the museum. It's one of the parts that I'm the most proud of. So our educational programs, we serve approximately any year about 12,000 K-12 students and families from the immediate neighborhoods. But we're not just inviting them to participate in art activities or tour the museum. What we want to do is we want to empower them and equip these young people to imagine and build towards social equity. So we provide programming in these neighborhoods with the arts are severely underfunded. And what we do is we strive to empower young people to express themselves, assist them in developing the tools that they need to affect change. You know, we're working on career enhancing skills, lead them to see themselves as not just part of it, as agents of change. Something that we've done, actually, we've debated for a while simply because it was a financial strain, but we've implemented recently. This is right, we had the conversation right before the pandemic, and we finalized it now, was the idea of paid internships as well, which is very important for us, because we felt like that again, unpaid internships were perpetuating this existing inequalities that we've already had, because the unpaid internships were giving the benefits of the internship, in this case, exposure to the workings of the museum, connections with the staff of the institution, you know, desirable work skills. But these were being offered exclusively to students and emerging professionals who can afford to spend their time working without any financial compensation. So we said, we need to get rid of that barrier as well. We, you know, I don't want to get into, you know, all the details of all of it. We have of educational programs that we provide. But, you know, even during this time now, one of the programs that's a highlight for the museum is our teen summer program. Our teen summer program engages 12 students from the community through it's a paid stipend program. So they come and they get paid to come into the museum, and we run workshops with them, and they work with a facilitated through an educator. And what they're doing is they're talking about social justice issues, social concerns. They produce a zine at a certain point, and then we also have an exhibition. This year we were not able to do it, clearly, because we were shut down. But what we decided to do was shift the whole thing to online, and we provided those that couldn't. We provided them, you know, with computers and so on to be able to work from home if they needed. But more importantly, what we were able to do was we expanded it from 12 to 24 students. Oh, wow. Because we were able, because of some cost savings from other programs that we were not able to do, we decided let's open it up a little bit. And the sad thing, or the interesting thing, is any given summer we have about 60 students. Take about 12 through an interview process, through a rigorous process. But this year we opened it to 24 students, and because of the lack of opportunities and the need for financial assistance, we had 458 applicants for 24 spots. Wow. You know, so it's been a discussion with my board now. How do we, I mean, I'm not sure we can serve 458 students, but how do we continue to expand this further so we can serve a larger audience? Because there is clearly this need just for well, not just sort of the financial part, but this need to serve these young people in the community, especially during the summer. So yes, I mean, we do a lot of programming with the youth.
It's really wonderful, Klaudio. All I can say is we want to partner with you. So we'll have to talk about that offline, because it just sounds like you're doing amazing, amazing work. And thank you. We are at the end of our time. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to the audience for tuning in and participating. I have to say, small mention, the opening music was produced and performed by Simon Mogul, tenor sax player studying at the New School in New York City. So join us next week, Thursday at 10, where my colleague, WPHL Deputy Director Julio Capo Jr. will chat with Dr. Raquel Lopez of the World AIDS Museum and Educational Center. So thank you all. Thank you, Klaudio. Stay safe.
Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.